What was I thinking? You ever asked yourself that? Yesterday I had I don't know if you have those nights. I have them like 1 or 2 times a week. I have a bad night's sleep. And I got up early and I was groggy all day, and I needed to go to Best Buy. And I needed to pick up a new modem because, of course, my old one doesn't work, and so I have to get this fixed and do it quickly. So I went with my daughter. We go to Best Buy, and I get some help there, and then I go to this counter, the cashier, with this new modem, and I was trying to ask some questions about the cost, because obviously they tell you this is what it's going to cost, but it's always more. And so I was asking about it, and then I made some little joke, and my daughter and the cashier just went like this. Well, have you ever had that happen? And I later asked my daughter, well, did I offend this guy? And she said, no, you just didn't make any sense. And that's kind of what I'm thinking Peter must have asked himself after he asked these things about Jesus in our story today. Jesus has taken his disciples, Peter, James, and John, up to this mountain, this sacred mountain, to pray and everything. And they fall asleep. Of course, they're groggy too. And then out of nowhere, Moses and Elijah appear. And they're talking to Jesus. And then when they're ready to leave, as we read in the story, Peter makes these crazy announcements. Lord, it's great we're here. Hey, I got a great idea. Let's make 3 booths or tents, and we'll just stay up here. It's like, well, that's out of left field. And at that moment, God says, this is my son. Listen to him. It says in one of the Gospels, he didn't know what he was saying, but there's a reason he said what he did. There's a reason he was talking in this manner. And in the Luke version of this same story, Luke chapter 9, this is when Peter speaks. He's waking up, and Moses and Elijah are there, and what Luke tells us is they are talking about Jesus. In the literal Greek, it says Exodus from Jerusalem. Now remember, the Exodus is where the children of Israel were delivered from slavery and bondage in Egypt by God, and God dwelt with them in the desert for 40 years. But it says he's speaking of his Exodus, so when Peter heard them talking, and as they're getting ready to leave, he wants to keep them there. So he says, well, we'll just build these tents, just like in the Exodus. And in fact, even today in Jewish tradition, in Jesus' day, they have what's called the Festival of Booths, where they put up tents or booths in their backyards, and they remember and they reside in there, and they remind themselves of the time when God dwelt with them in the wilderness. So Peter is saying, let's relive this. We don't need to go to Jerusalem. Let's just stay up here and do this, Jesus. Now, that's the reason he said that, but there's a why behind this also. Why would Peter come up with this idea? Look on page 983. Peter's a very interesting character because he says things, almost it sounds impulsively, but there's usually a motivation behind his comments. If you look at the first column down at verse 15, pretty much 2/3 of the way down the page, Jesus is asking the disciples, who do people say that I am? And they reply, some say Elijah, some say one of the prophets, and so forth. And he says, but what about you? Who do you say that I am? And Simon Peter says, verse 16, you are the Messiah, or the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus basically says, flesh and blood did not reveal this to you, but my Father in heaven. And then he goes on and says, I will give you the keys of the kingdom and everything. In other words, that this verse is that we Catholics like so much, what it says about Peter. And so it's a great blessing. But then look what happens next. Verse 21. After Peter recognizes Jesus as the Messiah, Jesus starts to tell the disciples just what that entails. What is his destiny? And look what it says in verse 21. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things in the hands of the elders, the chief priests and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. And then it says, Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Never, Lord, he said. And verse 23, then Jesus turned and said to him, get behind me, Satan, you are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. So this is what's going through Peter's mind. Peter has related this thing to the Exodus, this way out. Because there's no way that Peter wants Jesus to go to Jerusalem to die. Peter's saying, there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way out. There's got to be something we can do to keep him from having to do this. And I don't want to go either. I'm not up for this. So he's trying to say, well, Jesus, let's just stay on this mountain. You're in your glorified state. Moses and Elijah are here. We will have heaven on earth. And we don't have to go down and face the world. You don't have to face this. Then God says, listen to my son. And what he means by that, what God means by that is that we have to follow Jesus' example because Jesus knows his destiny. You can't run away from the calling of God. You and I sometimes find ourselves in very difficult situations. Sometimes it's related to family or work or finances, or sometimes it's a health issue, and there's nothing we can do. And we try to exercise all our cleverness as well as we can to find a way out of a situation. You ever found yourself in a situation where you can't get out of it? God tells you, listen to my son. Embrace what I've given you, because sometimes the only way out, the only exodus, the only way out is to go through it. That's the Lenten pilgrimage. That's that journey we were singing about at the beginning of the Mass, is to go through what God is calling us to face. You may have noticed that we have these new Stations of the Cross up. They were put up last week. It's an interesting story behind that, actually. Dave Brodsky, who brought our cross in, he's in here. He brought this suggestion of bringing in the Stations of the Cross 5 years ago. And we were moving them over from our Blessed Sacrament Chapel. And then one of the holy families of our church, our chapel, donated these. And so they're a great blessing to us. But I want to call your attention to number 12 over here. This is Jesus dies on the cross. And last Friday when we had our Stations of the Cross at 5:30, what we did is when we came to this station, we paused longer because of what Christ did for us. Now, I mentioned this to somebody Friday night, so please don't mention if you already heard this, but can somebody tell me what is significant, what is interesting about this particular station as opposed to all the others? What's significant about it? It's a little bit of a trick question, you know me. Yes, there's an exit sign there. There's an exit sign. Yeah. Do you know what the Greek word in the New Testament Greek, what the Greek word for exit is? Exodus. Exodus. The way out. This is our way out. Whatever you have to go through, Jesus went there on our behalf, and He adds meaning and purpose and fellowship with Him through our experiences. Good or bad, it's our way out because everything now is linked to what Jesus did on the cross for us. On the cross, which we celebrate during this Lenten season especially and look forward to Holy Week, on the cross, Jesus took all the sins of the world, bore them on His shoulders to set us free. And on the cross, every persecution you receive for your faith or for doing the right thing for God is shared by Jesus Christ. Let me read something to you. This is from the 2nd century document called the Martyrdom of Polycarp. And at the beginning of this introduction, it's a very beautiful story, but there's a description of these people who are martyred for their faith. But listen to what it says and see if you can relate to this. But these martyrs, but they themselves reached such a level of bravery that not one of them uttered a cry or a groan, thus showing to us all that at the very hour when they were being tortured, the martyrs of Christ were absent from the flesh, or rather, now listen to this, that the Lord was standing by and conversing with them. You see, your experience, your transfiguration experience, as Jesus spoke with Moses and Elijah, when you are going through your struggles, your transfiguration is Jesus is speaking to you. Jesus is with you. Jesus Christ is with you, whatever you have to deal with. And it goes on, for they set before their eyes the escape, the way out from that eternal fire which is never extinguished, while with the eyes of their heart they gaze upon the good things which are reserved for those who endure patiently. God tells you this morning, whatever you're facing, good or bad, whatever you're dealing with, listen to my Son. Follow his example. If there's a cross, then bear that cross. But look to his cross, because that is our way out. That is our eternal life. That is our hope. That is our presence of God with us wherever we may go.